Professor Kethvar stood at the front of Lecture Hall 17 with all four of his arms crossed, which would have been impressive if it wasn't such an obvious show-off move. His purple skin gleamed under the artificial lighting as he surveyed his xenoarchaeology class with the kind of smug satisfaction usually reserved for cats who'd just knocked something expensive off a shelf. "Welcome, students, to Advanced Xenoarchaeological Analysis," he announced, his voice carrying that particular tone professors used when they wanted you to know they were very important. "I am Professor Kethvar, and I have spent the last 47 years studying the most complex puzzles and artifacts in the known galaxy." In the front row, Zara straightened her already perfect posture. The Centaurian's crystalline features practically sparkled with academic enthusiasm. She'd probably memorized the entire course catalog before breakfast. Next to her, Blix methodically arranged 17 different scanning devices on his desk, because apparently that's what passed for casual preparation on Andromeda Prime. The guy's idea of spontaneity was probably color-coding his socks. 2 rows back, Quinn's tentacles were already twitching with what could charitably be called pre-exam anxiety, despite this being the first day of class. Rigelians were known for many things, but chill was not one of them. The poor kid looked like he'd combust if someone so much as mentioned a pop quiz. And then there was Jake. Jake Martinez, the lone human in a class of overachieving aliens, was slumped in his chair near the back, looking like he'd rather be literally anywhere else. His Earth University exchange program had seemed like a good idea 6 months ago, but right now, he was questioning every life choice that had led him to a lecture hall on Kepler Station, listening to a purple alien with a superiority complex drone on about ancient mystery. "Today," Professor Kethvar continued, producing an ornate metallic cube from beneath his podium, "I present to you the crown jewel of our collection. Behold, the Vorthan Enigma box." He held the artifact aloft like it was the Holy Grail, which, considering how the other students leaned forward with reverence, might as well have been true. The box was about the size of a softball, covered in intricate geometric patterns that seemed to shift and dance in the light. "This puzzle has baffled the greatest minds in xenoarchaeology for over 3,000 years, the professor declared. "Scholars from 17 different species have attempted to unlock its secrets. All have failed. The complexity of its mechanism is beyond current understanding, a testament to the advanced civilization that created it 10 millennia ago." Jake yawned. "Legend says that whoever solves the Vorthan Enigma will unlock secrets that could revolutionize our understanding of ancient technologies," Kethvar went on, clearly enjoying his dramatic moment. "Of course, such a feat would require cognitive abilities far beyond what any contemporary mind could achieve." He set the box down on the demonstration table with ceremonial precision. "This semester, we will study this artifact intensively. Perhaps one of you will make some small breakthrough in understanding its basic principles, though I wouldn't hold my breath." Jake stretched, cracked his knuckles, and started making his way toward his usual seat in the back corner, because apparently walking during lectures was just what humans did when they were bored, which was exactly when everything went sideways. "As I was saying," Professor Kethvar continued, warming to his favorite subject, himself, "the Vorthan Enigma represents the pinnacle of ancient engineering. The locking mechanism alone consists of 47 interlocking components, each requiring precise manipulation in a specific sequence that must be calculated using advanced quantum mathematics." Zara was already furiously taking notes, her stylus moving so fast it was practically smoking. Blix had fired up 3 different spectral analyzers and was muttering something about harmonic resonance frequencies under his breath. Quinn's tentacles had gone full pretzel mode with anxiety, which was never a good sign. "The artifact's creators embedded 17 different layers of encryption into its very molecular structure," the professor went on, clearly enjoying the awe on his students' faces. "Each layer must be decoded using principles from extinct languages, obsolete mathematical systems, and archaeological techniques that haven't been practiced in over 2 millennia. Jake, meanwhile, was still making his way toward the back of the lecture hall, because apparently the scenic route was just how humans approached seating arrangements. As he passed the demonstration table, he absently reached out and picked up the puzzle box, turning it over in his hands like it was a mildly interesting paperweight. "Furthermore," Kethvar proclaimed, "the temporal displacement field surrounding the artifact means that even touching it incorrectly could cause irreversible damage to both the puzzle and the handler. This is why we observe it only from a safe distance using flip." The sound was small, almost insignificant, like a pen cap being removed or a door latch catching, but in the sudden silence of Lecture Hall 17, it might as well have been a sonic boom. Jake blinked down at the box in his hands. What had been a solid metallic cube 30 seconds ago was now unfolded into an intricate crystalline flower, each petal glowing softly with inner light. Tiny holographic symbols danced in the air above it, and somewhere in the distance, he could swear he heard what sounded like cosmic wind chimes. "Ha!" he said, still standing in the middle of the aisle. "That's pretty." The lecture hall had gone so quiet you could have heard a pin drop in the next solar system. Professor Kethvar's forearms hung limp at his sides, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for water. His purple skin had faded to a sickly lavender that suggested either imminent fainting or complete psychological breakdown. Zara's stylus had frozen mid-word. Blix's 17 scanning devices were beeping frantically, displaying readouts that apparently made no sense whatsoever. Quinn's tentacles had gone completely rigid, which for a Rigelian was the equivalent of a full system crash. Jake said, looking around at the sea of stunned faces. "Did I break something? Because I can put it back if you want." That seemed to snap the professor out of his catatonic state. "Put it back?" he shrieked, his voice climbing several octaves. "Put it back? You just solved the most complex archaeological puzzle in recorded history. You can't just put it back." Jake shrugged. "I mean, I just wiggled the thing that looked wiggly. It seemed pretty straightforward." "Straightforward?" The professor's voice had reached frequencies that were probably violating several noise ordinances. "That puzzle has defeated the greatest minds of 17 civilizations. Doctoral candidates have spent entire lifetimes studying just one of its surface mechanisms. Yeah, but see, this little bit here was obviously designed to slide sideways," Jake explained helpfully, pointing to what looked like a completely seamless section of the artifact. "And then, when you twist this part clockwise, while pressing down on that indented bit, the whole thing just sort of unfolds. Basic mechanics, really." The silence that followed was so profound it had its own gravitational field. Jake looked around at everyone's expressions and sighed. "This is going to be one of those things, isn't it?" Professor Kethvar had progressed from stunned silence to what could generously be described as a controlled meltdown. His forearms were now gesticulating wildly in different directions, like he was trying to conduct 4 separate orchestras while having a nervous breakdown. 47 years, he muttered, pacing back and forth. 47 years I've been studying that artifact. I've written 17 research papers on its theoretical mechanisms. I've given lectures at symposiums across the galaxy about its impenetrable design. And this human just... He gestured helplessly at Jake, who was still holding the now blooming puzzle box like it was a mildly interesting houseplant. "I hate to interrupt your existential crisis," Jake said, "but should I be worried about this thing? Because it's getting warmer, and I'm pretty sure it's humming now." That snapped everyone out of their shock. Suddenly the entire class was on their feet, except for Quinn, whose tentacles had gone completely limp with what appeared to be academic trauma. "Don't move," Zura shouted, pulling out a device that looked like it belonged in a sci-fi medical drama. "I'm scanning for temporal displacement fields." "Radiation levels are nominal," Blix announced, his 17 scanners now creating a light show that would have made a disco jealous. "But the quantum signature is completely unprecedented. This shouldn't be possible." Professor Kethvar had stopped pacing and was now staring at Jake with the kind of intensity usually reserved for unsolved murder mysteries. "How?" he demanded. "Explain to me exactly what you did, step by step, motion by motion." "Okay, but it's really not that complicated," Jake said. "I picked it up, right? And I could feel that this bit here wanted to move sideways, so I pushed it. Then this other bit was obviously a twist mechanism, so I twisted it. And when I pressed down on that little indented part, everything just sort of clicked into place." "Wanted to move?" The professor's eye twitched. "The artifact communicated its desires to you?" "Well, not communicated exactly. It's more like, you know when you pick up a screwdriver and you can just tell which way it's supposed to turn? It's basic tactile feedback." Blix looked up from his scanner array. "Professor, according to these readings, the humans somehow bypassed all 47 locking mechanisms simultaneously. The mathematical probability of randomly achieving the correct sequence is approximately 1 in 4 trillion. "It wasn't random," Jake protested. "It was obvious. Look, I can close it again if you want." He started to manipulate the artifact. "No!" came a chorus of voices from around the room. "Do not touch it!" Professor Kethvar shrieked. "If you close it incorrectly, we might never be able to open it again." "But I literally just opened it 30 seconds ago." "That was different. That was, the professor seemed to be struggling with concepts that his academic brain couldn't process. "That was impossible." Jake looked at the crystalline flower in his hands, then at the room full of panicking aliens, then back at the artifact. The holographic symbols were still dancing around it, and the humming had evolved into something that sounded almost musical. "You know what?" he said. "I'm just going to put this down very carefully and back away slowly. This feels like the kind of situation where everyone needs to take a deep breath and maybe call someone more important than me." He gently placed the opened puzzle box on the demonstration table, where it continued to glow and hum innocently. The holographic symbols rearranged themselves into what looked suspiciously like a smiley face. Is it happy?" Quinn whispered, his tentacles starting to uncurl slightly. "Artifacts don't have emotions," Professor Kethvar said automatically, then paused. "Although, I suppose after today I'm not sure what's impossible anymore." Jake took a step back and raised his hands. "Look, I didn't mean to break your artifact or your worldview or whatever. I was just trying to get to my seat. Can I do that now, or do we need to evacuate the building?" The professor looked at him, then at the peacefully glowing puzzle box, then at his class of stunned students. His shoulders sagged. "I think," he said slowly, "I need to make a call." 20 minutes later, Lecture Hall 17 had been transformed into what looked like the command center for a small intergalactic war. Zara had somehow produced enough scanning equipment to stock a research vessel, all of it beeping, humming, and projecting various colored lights around the room. She'd also appointed herself chief investigator, because apparently that's what happened when you were a straight-A student faced with an impossible phenomenon. "Okay, Jake," she said, clipboard in hand and wearing what could only be described as her serious science face. "We're going to recreate your process step by step. But first, we need baseline measurements." Jake, who had finally made it to his seat, only to be immediately summoned back to the front, looked longingly at the door. "You know, I could just audit this class instead. Really take the pressure off." "Absolutely not," Professor Kethvar declared. He'd recovered from his initial breakdown and was now in full academic investigation mode, which was somehow worse than his earlier panic. "This is the most significant archaeological discovery in centuries. We need to document everything." Blix had arranged his 17 scanners in a perfect circle around the demonstration table, creating what he called optimal data collection geometry. The fact that it looked like a technological seance apparently escaped everyone except Jake. "First test," Zara announced. "Jake, please pick up this training cube." She produced a simple metallic block that looked nothing like the Vorthan Enigma. "We need to establish your baseline tactile sensitivity." Jake picked up the cube. Nothing happened. "Fascinating," Blix murmured, studying his readouts. "Completely normal manipulation patterns. Standard grip pressure. Typical exploratory movements. Nothing unusual." "Now try this one," Zara said, handing him a slightly more complex puzzle. This one had a few sliding panels and what looked like a combination lock. Jake turned it over in his hands, frowned slightly, slid 2 panels sideways, twisted the top section a quarter turn, and pressed what appeared to be a completely smooth section of the surface. The puzzle opened with a soft chime. The scanners went crazy. "How did you know to press there?" Professor Kethvar demanded. "That activation point isn't even visible." "It was warmer than the rest of the surface," Jake explained. "Heat differential usually indicates some kind of mechanism underneath. Plus it felt slightly soft, like there was something compressible behind it." Zara was frantically scribbling notes. "Thermal sensitivity, pressure differentiation, intuitive understanding of mechanical principles, this is unprecedented." "It's really not," Jake protested. "This is basic troubleshooting. You look for the parts that are different and figure out why they're different." Quinn, who had been quietly observing from a safe distance, tentatively raised a tentacle. "But we scanned that puzzle for weeks. Our instruments detected no thermal variations or structural anomalies." "Your instruments are probably too sensitive," Jake said. "Sometimes you need to use analog methods, like actually touching things." The 3 aliens exchanged glances that suggested this was a revolutionary concept. "Next test," Zara announced, producing an artifact that looked like a crystalline dodecahedron covered in glowing runes. "This is a Zerillian memory crystal. It's been sealed for over 5,000 years. The opening mechanism is completely theoretical." Jake accepted the crystal and immediately frowned. "This one's different. It's not mechanical at all. It's more like a sequence, like a musical pattern." He began touching different runes in what seemed like a random order, except it wasn't random at all. There was a rhythm to it, a melody that only he seemed to hear. After about 30 seconds, the crystal bloomed open like a flower, revealing a miniature holographic library inside. Professor Kethvar sat down heavily. "That artifact has been studied by musicologists, mathematicians, and cryptographers for decades. The theoretical papers alone fill an entire archive. Yeah, but if you hum while you touch the runes, you can feel which ones are in tune and which ones aren't, Jake said. It's like tuning a guitar, except with ancient alien math. Blix's primary scanner started making distressed noises. The harmonic frequencies he generated aren't in any known database. He's improvising musical mathematics that don't technically exist. They'll do exist, Jake corrected. You just have to listen for them. By now, a small crowd had gathered outside the lecture hall. Word was spreading through Kepler Station that something impossible was happening in the xenoarchaeology department. Jake could see faces pressed against the windows, and at least 3 people were recording everything on personal devices. "No more test," Zara said, her voice tight with scientific fervor. She produced what looked like a metal sphere covered in impossible geometric patterns. "This is a fragment of a progenitor artifact. It predates known civilization by millions of years. It has never shown any response to any stimulus." She handed it to Jake with the reverence usually reserved for religious relics. Jake held it for about 5 seconds, then handed it back. "Nope. Nope. That one's not a puzzle, it's a paperweight." The silence that followed was broken only by the continued beeping of Blix's scanners. "It's a what?" Professor Kethvar sputtered. "A paperweight. Probably decorative. It's got all these fancy patterns to look important, but there's no mechanism inside. It's just a rock that someone carved up to look mysterious." Zariah stared at the artifact, then at Jake, then back at the artifact. "But the theoretical complexity of the geometric pattern suggests advanced mathematical understanding that rivals our current knowledge." "Yeah, or someone was really bored and good at carving," Jake said. "Sometimes a pretty rock is just a pretty rock." Professor Kethvar made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Do you realize what you've just done? You've potentially invalidated 40 years of progenitor research with a single offhand comment." "I mean, you could always ask other humans to look at it," Jake suggested. "Get a second opinion." That's when the door burst open and Dean Vexthara strode in, her 6 legs clicking authoritatively on the floor and her compound eyes taking in the chaos with obvious displeasure. "Professor Kethvar," she announced in a voice that could cut through hull plating. "I've been getting reports of impossible archaeological breakthroughs and mass hysteria. Explain." Everyone turned to look at Jake, who was still holding the Xerillian memory crystal and looking like he'd rather be literally anywhere else in the galaxy. "Well," he said weakly, "this is awkward." Dean Vexthara was the kind of administrator who could make a black hole feel self-conscious about its gravitational pull. Standing 7 feet tall on her 6 articulated legs, with compound eyes that could track 17 different conversations simultaneously, she had a reputation for cutting through academic nonsense with the precision of a surgical laser. "Professor Kethvar," she repeated, her voice carrying the kind of authority that suggested immediate compliance was not optional. "I have had 3 department heads, 2 research coordinators, and the head of station security contact me in the last 10 minutes. They're reporting everything from temporal anomalies to the possible discovery of a new form of consciousness. So, I'll ask again, explain." The professor opened his mouth, closed it, then gestured helplessly at Jake, who was still standing there, holding a 5,000-year-old Xerillian memory crystal like it was a coffee mug. "The human," Kethvar said weakly, "solved the Vorthon enigma." Dean Vexthara's compound eyes focused on Jake with laser intensity. "The human solved what now?" "Also the Xerillian memory crystal," Zara added helpfully, "and he identified the progenitor artifact as a decorative paperweight." "In under an hour," Blix chimed in, his scanner still beeping frantically around him like a technological Greek chorus. The dean's head swiveled between Jake and the opened artifacts on the demonstration table, her compound eyes making tiny clicking sounds that probably meant she was processing information at light speed. "Young human," she said, moving closer to Jake with the fluid grace of a predator who'd spotted interesting prey. "What is your name?" "Jake Martinez, ma'am. And before you ask, I have no idea how I did any of this. I was just trying to get to my seat." "Show me," she commanded, producing what looked like a metallic twisted knot from somewhere within her robes. "This is a temporal loop paradox. It's been in our collection for over 2 centuries. The theoretical mathematics required to solve it don't exist yet." Jake accepted the artifact and immediately made a face like he'd tasted something unpleasant. "Oh, this one's nasty. Whoever made it was definitely showing off." He began manipulating sections of the twisted metal, his movements creating a soft whistling sound. "See, the whole thing is based on a false premise. It's not actually a paradox at all, it's just designed to look like one." The artifact began unfolding in his hands, revealing layers of complexity that shouldn't have been physically possible. As it opened, Small holographic equations appeared in the air, resolving mathematical problems that had puzzled theorists for generations. The trick, Jake continued, apparently oblivious to the fact that he was casually revolutionizing temporal mathematics, is recognizing that time doesn't actually loop here. It just creates the illusion of looping by using spatial displacement to mask temporal linearity. Once you account for that, the sequence becomes obvious. Dean Vexthara's compound eyes had gone completely still, which for her species was the equivalent of dropping your jaw. Around the room, the various scanning devices were producing a symphony of alerts, warnings, and diagnostic chimes that suggested they were recording data beyond their operational parameters. "Fascinating," she murmured. "And this process feels intuitive to you?" "Yeah, pretty much. It's like untying a knot. You can feel where the tension is and where it wants to go." Jake handed her the now fully opened artifact, which was displaying a slowly rotating hologram of what appeared to be a four-dimensional flower. "Although I have to say, whoever designed these things really overcomplicated everything. Most of this stuff could be way simpler." Professor Kethvar let out a sound that might have been laughter or might have been the last stages of academic breakdown. "Simpler. He says they could be simpler." "Well, they could," Jake insisted. "Like this Vorthen thing over here." He gestured at the original puzzle box, still glowing softly on the demonstration table. "All those complex locking mechanisms are basically just showing off. The core function could be achieved with maybe 3 moving parts." "The core function?" Dean Vexthara leaned forward intently. "What exactly do you think these artifacts are designed to do?" Jake shrugged. "Store information, mostly. The Vorthen Enigma is basically a really fancy filing cabinet. The Xerillian Crystal is more like a multimedia library. And the temporal loop thing is a math textbook that teaches you by making you solve the problems yourself." He paused, looking around at the stunned faces surrounding him. "I mean, that's obvious, right? They're all educational tools, teaching devices. The complexity isn't the point, it's the process of figuring them out that matters." The lecture hall had gone so quiet you could hear the cosmic background radiation. Dean Vexthara slowly straightened to her full, imposing height. "Professor Kethvar, how long have you been studying the Vorthen Enigma as an impenetrable mystery rather than an interactive learning device?" The professor's 4 arms drooped. 47 years. "And the Xerillian Crystal?" "The department has been analyzing it for 63 years. "The temporal loop paradox?" 215 years, ma'am." Jake watched this exchange with growing unease. I'm starting to get the feeling I've made this situation worse somehow." "On the contrary," Dean Vexthara said, and for the first time since entering the room, she sounded almost amused. "Mr. Martinez, you appear to have solved in one afternoon what our entire archaeological community has been struggling with for centuries." "But that doesn't make sense," Zara protested. "These artifacts represent the pinnacle of ancient technological achievement. They require advanced degrees in multiple disciplines just to understand the theoretical framework." "Do they?" the dean asked mildly. "Or do we simply assume they do because we've been approaching them with the wrong methodology for the past several hundred years?" She turned back to Jake, who was looking increasingly like he wanted to crawl under the nearest desk. "Mr. Martinez, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. When you look at these artifacts, what do you see?" Jake considered this seriously. "Tools," he said finally. "Really well-made tools that someone put a lot of thought into. But they're still just tools. They're designed to be used, not worshipped." "And you see this, intuitively?" "I guess. I mean, back on Earth we've got this saying, if you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. Most problems have simple solutions, even if they look complicated from the outside." Dean Vexthara was quiet for a long moment, her compound eyes reflecting the light from the various activated artifacts. "Professor Kethvar," she said finally, "I think it's time we had a very serious conversation about our entire approach to xenoarchaeology." The professor nodded weakly. "Yes, ma'am. But first," she continued, producing what looked like an entire briefcase full of mysterious artifacts, "I believe Mr. Martinez has some more homework to do." Jake stared at the briefcase, then at the dean, then at the room full of expectant faces. "You know what?" he said. "I should have just stayed home and taken community college." 3 hours later, Jake sat slumped in his chair, surrounded by what looked like the aftermath of an archaeological explosion. The demonstration table was covered with 17 different artifacts in various states of activation, each one glowing, humming, or projecting holographic displays that would have made a planetarium jealous. The air itself seemed to shimmer with residual energy from whatever ancient technologies he'd accidentally awakened. Dean Vexthara stood behind what had become known as the breakthrough table, methodically checking items off a list that kept getting longer instead of shorter. Each artifact Jake opened seemed to reveal 3 more puzzles hidden inside it, like the world's most frustrating nesting dolls. "The crystalline matrix of Vortak," she announced, making another mark on her pad. "Solved in 14 minutes, previously studied for 87 years. "The time dilation field was throwing everyone off," Jake mumbled, his head in his hands. "If you ignore the temporal distortion and just focus on the spatial geometry, it's basically a Rubik's Cube with extra dimensions." Professor Kethvar, who had progressed through the 5 stages of academic grief and was now somewhere in the vicinity of bemused acceptance, shook his head slowly. "A Rubik's Cube. 87 years of research, and it's a children's toy with extra dimensions." Zara had filled 3 entire notebooks with observations and was starting on a 4th. Her academic enthusiasm had evolved from excitement to obsession to what could charitably be called scientific mania. "Jake, when you solved the harmonic resonance sphere, you used a mathematical principle that doesn't exist in our textbooks." "I whistled at it until it whistled back," Jake said wearily. "That's not mathematics, that's just, I don't know, being polite." "But the frequency modulations you generated were calculating 17-dimensional harmonic convergence," Blix protested, his scanners now arranged in what looked like a shrine to impossible data. "Our computers can't even model that level of complexity." "Your computers are overthinking it," Jake replied. "Sometimes you just have to hum along and see what happens." Quinn, who had spent the last hour in a state of academic shock, tentatively raised a tentacle. "But Jake, how do you know which frequency to start with?" Jake looked at him with the patient expression of someone explaining something incredibly obvious to a very confused child. "The same way you know which key a song is in. You listen until it sounds right." Dean Vecthara set down her clipboard and fixed Jake with her compound gaze. "Mr. Martinez, in the past 3 hours, you have single-handedly solved more archaeological puzzles than our entire department has managed in the last century. You've revolutionized our understanding of 17 different ancient civilizations and proven that most of our theoretical frameworks are, to use the technical term, complete nonsense." "I'm really sorry about that," Jake said sincerely. "I didn't mean to break your academic theories." "Oh, you didn't break them," she replied with what might have been amusement. "You simply demonstrated that they were never correct to begin with. There's a difference." Professor Kethvar straightened up with visible effort. "Dean Vexthara, I think I owe the department an apology, and possibly my resignation." "Nonsense," the dean said briskly. "What you owe the department is a complete curriculum revision, starting immediately." She turned back to Jake, who was eyeing the door like a marathon runner eyeing the finish line. "Mr. Martinez, I'm prepared to offer you a full scholarship to complete your xeno-archaeological studies here at Kepler Station. We'll fast-track you through the doctoral program, give you your own research lab, and assign you a team of graduate students." Jake's expression went through several stages of horror before settling on polite panic. "That's very generous, but I'm actually a business major. I'm just here on an exchange program because I needed humanities credits." The silence that followed was profound enough to have its own event horizon. "You're a business major," Dean Vexthara repeated slowly. "Marketing and management, actually. I was thinking about maybe opening a restaurant when I graduate." Zara's stylus snapped in half. "A restaurant?" Professor Kethvar echoed faintly. "Yeah, casual dining. Maybe some fusion cuisine. I make a pretty good grilled cheese sandwich." Blix's primary scanner made a sound like a dying whale, which seemed appropriate, given the circumstances. Dean Vexthara was quiet for a long moment, her compound eyes reflecting the light from the 17 glowing artifacts that Jake had casually solved while discussing his lunch plans. "Mr. Martinez," she said finally, "what grade would you like in this class?" Jake perked up slightly. "An A would be great. I need to maintain my GPA for the exchange program." "Done," she made a note on her pad. "Professor Kethvar, please ensure that Mr. Martinez receives full credit for advanced xenoarchaeological analysis, regardless of whether he attends any future classes." "But Dean," Zara protested, "shouldn't he at least write a paper on his methodology?" "His methodology appears to be try stuff and see what happens," the dean replied dryly. "I'm not sure that requires extensive documentation." Jake stood up, gathering his backpack with visible relief. "So I can go? Because I'm supposed to meet some friends for lunch and I'm already 3 hours late." "By all means," Dean Vexthara said. "Enjoy your meal." Jake headed for the door, then paused and looked back at the table full of activated artifacts. "Oh, should I turn these off before I go? Some of them look like they might be running down their batteries." Please don't, Professor Kethvar said quickly. We need to study them while they're active. It may be our only chance to understand how they actually work. Fair enough, Jake shrugged and headed for the door again. He made it exactly 3 steps before Dean Vexthara called out, Mr. Martinez, one last thing. Jake turned around with the expression of someone who knew their day was about to get complicated again. This briefcase of artifacts I brought? There's one more puzzle in there that we haven't tried yet. She produced what looked like a simple wooden box, completely unremarkable except for the faint shimmer of energy around its edges. This one has been completely unresponsive for over 400 years. No one has any idea what it does. Jake accepted the box reluctantly. I don't suppose I could just leave this for next week? I'm afraid academic curiosity compels me to insist. Jake sighed and turned the wooden box over in his hands. After a moment, he frowned. This isn't a puzzle. I'm sorry? It's not a puzzle, he repeated. It's a lunchbox. He pressed what appeared to be a completely smooth section of the wood. The box opened with a soft click, revealing a small compartment containing what looked suspiciously like ancient alien trail mix. See? Someone's packed lunch. Probably got left behind during an excavation. He sniffed the contents experimentally. Actually smells pretty good for being 400 years old. Preservatives must be amazing. The room stared at him in collective silence. Jake closed the lunchbox and handed it back to the dean. You know, I hate to tell you this, but I think you guys might be overthinking some of this stuff. And with that observation hanging in the air like a philosophical bomb, Jake Martinez, business major and accidental archaeological revolutionary, finally escaped Lecture Hall 17 and went to find his grilled cheese sandwich. Behind him, the greatest minds in xenoarchaeology sat, surrounded by glowing artifacts, and the uncomfortable realization that sometimes the most profound discoveries come from the simple act of actually paying attention to what's right in front of you. Professor Kethvar looked at the wooden lunchbox, then at his colleagues, then at the 17 solved puzzles humming softly on his demonstration table. I think, he said slowly, we need to completely rethink everything we thought we knew about everything. Dean Vexthara nodded thoughtfully. Yes, but first, I think we should probably figure out how to turn all these things off before they overload the station's power grid. As if on cue, the lights flickered, and somewhere in the distance, an alarm began to sound. It was going to be a very long semester.